Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. I hope you're ready to see your world as a piece of art, be it a performance piece of art, or maybe you're looking at your own hero's journey. Because I have with me today an incredible individual, Matt Maes from the Quantum Keyhole studio. And I want to ask everyone to help me welcome him, and this one goes out to the seekers of creativity and imagination. Today, we're opening a door into a world where myth and art intertwine, where every brushstroke holds the potential to reconnect you with the deepest parts of your soul. Our guest, Matt, is not just a painter, he's a mythical painter, an artist who brings the fantastical into the tangible, and a creative educator who teaches others to unlock their own boundless potential through what he calls the quantum keyhole. Armed with a BA in media arts and animation, Matt doesn't just create art, he crafts entire experiences, and you'll see that in some of his work. His work invites you to step into the realm where imagination flows freely and the stories within us come to life. For those who crave deeper encounters with mythology, creativity, and themselves, Matt's art is a portal to discovery. Matt, thanks for being here today, my friend. How are you?
Right on. I'm doing amazing, and thank you for that really saucy slamming intro that you gave me. That's amazing. Thank you so much. So I'll try to do justice to what you just laid out, how you just described me. So really appreciate it. Great to be back. I know our first conversation was just super packed and amazing and enlivening, and yeah, I can't wait to get into it, man. Talking about symbolism in art, and yeah, it's great to be back, man.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm stoked you're here. Our last conversation was awesome, and I felt that we just kind of scratched the surface of our not only our relationship, but the idea of art and how your life is a form of art. And maybe you can give people a little bit of background and refresh their memories. Like, you have some incredible mythical pieces. I know that you have been part of multiple podcasts with other people where you talk about symbolism and mythology and art. But what is it about mythology for you and that type of influence that really draws you to doing that kind of art?
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah, give everybody kind of a primer on what I'm about and what
Right.
really fires me up and inspires me. I've been an artist since I was 7 years old, which is when I discovered drawing. And I've always loved storytelling. So whether it
Right.
was reading books or watching movies or shows or that, all that sort of thing, storytelling has always had a powerful influence in my life. And those have kind of intertwined over many years. But it was a handful of years ago, about 6 years ago, I want to say, where I watched the Power of Myth interviews between Joseph
Mm.
Campbell and Bill Moyers, where it really came into focus that really the path of mythic art is my calling, that bringing out this incredible, vibrant world of mythology. And really, what grabs me about mythology is that there are real deep patterns within our lived stories, within our psychology, with the way we experience the world. It's something that is innately knit into the way that we experience reality, and even beyond how we experience reality, even goes beyond our senses, right?
Yep.
Which
Yeah.
goes back to my path as a mythical artist, to bring that into focus through the senses, and to make the things that are intangible and sometimes ethereal and mystical into the artwork in ways that we can be in contact with them, because we can often get lost in that in our day-to-day lives, getting into the same kind of routines, into the same and I can tell you,
Yeah.
I'm actually a big fan of keeping of a certain measure of structure, you know but definitely getting us in touch with our heroes' journeys in our real lives through the art. And I think there's really something to be said for connecting with the divine and the mystical through the senses, whether it's visual art
Yep.
or sculpture or music or whatever, something that brings you to life.
Yeah, it's well said. I loved that series with Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers. It had a big impact on my life, and you start just digging deeper into these ideas of mythology, and it's like looking at a mirror of yourself. And for me, I listened to those lectures via audio, and I was able in some way to create a story in my mind and translate it in a certain way. But everybody has their own translation, and I think that your brand of art and you as an individual have a unique way of inviting people into mythology, and that is with your artwork. When I see the details of some of your pieces, like the one behind you, we spoke about some other pieces in the previous podcast, but maybe you could talk about that particular process. Are you, when you're creating something, do you feel you're creating an invitation for someone to find a story? Are you telling a story, or what is that act of creation for you?
Well, there are a lot of different parts to it. And
Okay.
when we think about how those are made up and how each one having its role, like myself as a creator, being inspired by something,
Right.
being open to curiosity, being open to what may come through. What's that whole source material, right? And for myself, I'm really blessed to have struck upon something like mythology, where you have an immense pool of sources to pull from, right? I mean, really, it's like a playground. Really, I've got like so much that I can grab onto and be inspired and let the ideas come through, right? And they each have different I'm a huge proponent of inherent meaning within symbolism, within within mythology, things that they actually represent. Now we can interpret them in a lot of different ways as well, and say, take a thing that's multidimensional and turn it around in our hands and see the
Yeah.
many different facets of it and see that they are all true, right? See that everything that is innately true about that thing can be relayed through art and can be, something that's translated through us, right? So I, as the creator, as the artist, I get to be the vessel through which those things come through, right? So I want to do justice to whatever it is that I'm painting, whoever it is that I'm painting, and say, the example of Freya behind me, right? She represents many different aspects, like love, beauty, magic, motherhood, and all of those can be translated through the art, right? And
Yeah.
so when I have those meanings, I can look at what universal symbols represent those things, right? How those things show up. Like, for example, there, like the sun cross would be a symbol that is represented in many different ways across many different cultures, right? Or for Norse culture, it would be the helm of Ah. It's this eight-sided symbol, right? It's this one with eight different directions to it, right? And it represents protection. You would often put it on your forehead, and it's used for intimidation, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And so it can see what shows up in different cultures, what's innate to that culture, and what kind of rhymes between cultures, right?
Mm.
Now, that's where we have to be really careful not to just mix and match things willy nilly, as you'd say,
Yeah.
but to be conscious of where those sources are, those different cultures, and how different symbols might connect. Like, another one would be Yggdrasil, is the world tree. Now, the world tree is a concept that transcends many different cultures,
Yeah.
right? Like the Kabbalah has the dual-sided tree. In Christianity, you have the tree of life. It's, like all over the place. You see the symbol of the tree, right? And even when we think about our anatomy, right, like the spine, our spine with all of our nerves coming out of our spine,
Yeah.
right? Much like the trunk with many different branches coming out of it. Even
Yeah.
our limbs, right? Like
Yeah.
our arms and legs, it's like we're, living trees
Yeah.
in a way, right?
Yeah.
So through these symbols, I'm calling to something that is subconscious, and something that we innately understand, something that at a deep level we can be conscious of and we can tap into. And when we see this through art, then we can bring ourselves more in tune with that very primal symbolism, or that very primal meaning in a felt sense, you
Yeah.
know? So I think meaning applies to the mind. It allows us to navigate, it allows us to understand, right? But you can hold ideas inside of your head and not have them activated, not realize them, right? Which I think is a thing that a lot of us get caught up in, where
Yeah.
we have thoughts inside of our heads that are not being utilized. They are not being incorporated, right? Even the meaning within words, like think about the word. This one struck me recently. Incorporate, like corpse, like
Mm.
the body, right? Like, or yeah, incorporated, right? To be embodied in something, right? So that's really what I'm going for through the art is, not just you see it now, that's, a nice painting, or oh, that looks cool. No, I want you to feel it coming through you, to feel what it is coming through, to have a felt presence experience of the divine coming through the art. That's really my goal. And when I see that, really the the greatest the greatest compliment I receive is when someone finds that through the art, when they really connect with a certain piece, when you can see that there is like the light coming through their eyes, like
Right.
you can see like something has just been turned on with that person. And to know that I've been able to be the vessel to make that possible is an honor. It's honestly, it tells me that I'm doing my job correctly, that I can see that coming through someone, that they were able to make that connection and find something of themselves within the art.
Yeah, that's well said. It's almost like a more meaningful language on some level. It transcends words when you can feel something. It's like poetry. When you
Oh yeah.
read, you know, why is it that, four stanzas of poetry say more, mean more, and feel more than a 400-page terms of service agreement? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's way more in
Now
that
that is
four
well
stanzas.
said. That is well said.
But it's the same with art too. Like it's the same process you're describing, I think. Like you're finding a way to, because you can't say it in words. It can only be through symbolism. It can only be through the transference of the felt presence that you resonate with what somebody is truly trying to design. Like, and that's a cool, there's not a whole lot of, I think the only word to describe that is ineffable. Ineffable. Am I saying that right? Ineffable. Like you
Ooh,
can't
yeah.
describe it because there's no words for it, but you
It's a
can
beautiful word.
share. Yeah, you can share in the joy. You can share in the invitation. You can share in the felt presence when you come upon and share it together, man. That's why I love talking to you. It's such a cool, unique
Same here.
way to express it. Yeah. It is an invitation in a way. It feels like art on some level is an invitation into something bigger. It allows you to, I don't know, like it seems like it allows you to share an experience with someone versus just having a conversation. And you can't have a conversation too, but is that too far out there? What do you think?
Well, yeah, and I think that even language, like when you say like can't describe with words, but
Yeah.
there's an energy that can come through words as well.
Okay.
You know, like say you're a public speaker and
Yeah.
say you have a teleprompter with just all your words and you're
Okay.
just reading the words, and you can use that. It can be a useful tool for sure. But if you're
Yep.
just sitting there, you can tell when that person is just like reading off of a script. You can tell when that
Yeah.
person is just, wrote, just repeating what is written, what's been written down, right? But when you
Yeah.
say something with passion, when you say something that you can feel that it has balls behind it, it has an energy
Totally.
behind it, you can feel that there is an urgency that comes through in that person's words, right? There's something that is so deeply expressed that it's like I need to project this. It matters more, like even if it matters more than life and death for you to know this, for me to express this, right? It's that
Yeah.
important. You know, you can feel the difference between those two people, right?
Yeah.
So, and through language used artfully. I love the sentiment you just expressed. Like you can read a line of poetry, and that can mean more to you than a 400-page whatever. This just just written for function, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I love thinking of things in terms of yes and as well.
Like
Like
that. Yeah.
in terms of language, words can be spoken beautifully. You can use your words to project something deep and amazing, and it's the
Yeah.
energy that's behind it, right? And the language is the vessel for that energy to come through, for that meaning to come through. Like here's another word, like enchantment. you
Mm.
know like when you're chanting something, when you're speaking something, and the energy that comes through in this magical way. And it's just amazing how you can take a word and you can sort of break it open and see what type of meaning is within that word. This is something it's just fascinated me for a long time, is how you can have these realizations about the hidden meanings within words, within language. There's something behind, you know even the word occult, right? Actually,
Yeah. Of
occult means
course.
that which is hidden, hidden under the surface, right?
Yeah.
So when you have that kind of curiosity and you're looking into the deeper meaning behind things, you can really end up in some fantastic places.
Yeah. I agree. I'm a huge fan of the occult, and sometimes I think that the everything is hidden in plain sight if you just know where to look, right?
Mhm.
Like maybe sometimes that gets you in trouble. It gets me in trouble sometimes, where like I find meaning where maybe someone didn't mean to put any meaning, but there's meaning there for me, and it is interesting to think about the way in which we imbue our words with energy. Like there's something magical about that. And then you start thinking about different kinds of language. Some people speak multiple language and they conjugate verbs different, so they're able to use their language in a way that is more robust. Or even if we look at hieroglyphics or maybe even runes, you've been talking a lot about runes lately and studying that, doing some of
Mhm.
the paintings you do. But maybe maybe we could just shift gears for a minute and like, what are runes? Or is that a language? Is it a symbolic art? Like maybe give us a definition and then to go into some of the ideas about runes that
Yeah,
you've been working on.
yeah, absolutely. Well, for people who are just getting into runes or had never heard the word runes
Right.
before, it's a language. It's an alphabet originally. Functionally, you have the elder and younger Futhark, which are from Norse culture, and not only are they a language, but they also represent different qualities. Each one of the runes represents different things. Like Fehu, for example, would represent abundance, represent growth, right? And you can even pair different runes together, right? So they can be complementary. They don't have to just be isolated, right? So like Fehu being growth, you also have Uruz, and Uruz is like, well, the term is the aurochs, or horn. It has these these prongs coming out of it, right? And it's interesting when you look at the symbol itself. You have the prongs which are facing downward, like downward from the sky, and it's like the force that allows that growth to happen. It's a force of creation.
Mm.
So you could say that if one example of Fehu would be like growth, like a flower blooming, and then you have the water, right, which comes down into the soil, which allows for that growth to take place, right? So that's a complementary action. That's you know that's
Yeah.
those two forces of creation working together. So if going back to the symbols, the the function, the meaning that precedes the symbols, that we inherit and that we work with them. So there's a term in Norse culture where it is called frith, and you could say that you have frith, your relationship with the deities, with the divine, right? But you can also have frith with the roots, right? Your relationship with the meaning of those things, and the sense that you have, um, being in tune with the sensation of what that rune represents, right? So going
Yeah.
back even beyond the language, even beyond the staves, the symbols, how the symbols are made up, staves being like the lines that make up the symbols, right? Then being in tune with that, one way that you can be in tune with it is called galder, which is to sing the runes. You could sing like you sing fehu, sing urus, so that sort of thing, and bring yourself in closer contact with them, in closer relationship with them. So that would be one way that people
Yeah.
work with runes, right? And there are even runes which are incorporated into the Freya piece here. So the Futhark is divided into three sets of eight. So you have Freya's eight, and then you have Heimdall's eight, and then you have Tyr's eight. So they form the full circle of 24 runes. So they each preside over each of these different runes. And so I would really encourage people to study them too. In terms, if you're curious about language,
Yeah.
we're here talking about language. How many sounds, how many letters actually come out of the runes too? Because many words in English come out of Norse words, and many symbols come out of Norse symbols as well. So yeah, I would encourage anybody who's curious to dive deeper into that one and see what you can find. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's something I'm extremely passionate about. Something that I've been going even deeper into in my own Norse culture. And I think one reason I've been thinking about this lately, like why it is that it's resonated with me so deeply, that part of myself. Now I have like seven different nationalities. you know, Literally, I've got Mexican, Spanish, French, Norwegian, Cherokee, Apache, and Chippewa. Both mom and dad side, they both have like multiple different cultures around them. You know, but I think there's a number of reasons. One, it's super badass. It's super cool. Honestly, and it's one that I've found the most naturally to be able to step into as well, to be
Mm.
able to find different pockets of people who also celebrate these things, right? And to be able to have a bond and a community and a kinship
Yeah.
with people who also celebrate these things. And going back to Freya, I've been able to be introduced into these cultures largely through the artwork. Largely because I
Yeah.
would show someone the artwork, and then that person is part of the community, and boom, there you go. Seemingly more natural than a lot of cultures. Um, I would also say that um, yeah, with my Mexican culture, like
Yeah.
I'm got part Mexican on my dad's side, and I was able to co-write, well, illustrate. I contributed many of the key ideas for this book as Rhea, Aztec priestess, and um, being able to go deep into the Mexican culture in that way was really, really cool and important. And being able to learn some of the language. We have some of the language in the beginning of the book, and some of the maps from the Aztec time period. And so that was really cool and honoring. And I felt I got to connect with my Mexican culture largely through that book. It's a really cool experience.
Yeah. Like it seems to me on some level that the shape of words. When you were describing the runes and you talk about the prongs coming down and being plugged into the ground, energy coming up, like that seems to be lost in a more scalpel like linguistic description, versus a word that carries a shape to it. It carries an image with it. It carries
Yeah.
gravity with it. I on some level, you can look at rune, and you had mentioned this. The runes are more than they're more than a symbol, or they're more than language. They're a symbol, and they have a shape to them and stuff. And it seems that you share that with the Aztecs. When I think of some of the artwork that comes out of the indigenous people of South America, like some of the symbolism on the pyramids or on some of the plates that you find, like there's kind of a lot of similarities in some ways, or I don't know, is there some similarities in the runes and that Mesoamerica, that Aztec sort of symbolism?
Maybe in different ways.
Okay.
Yeah. Ways that, well, okay, let's get into this. Like the connection between, we'd say, the pyramid or the ziggurats, right? Like you have
Okay.
well, here again, like things that interrelate, right? Like you
Yeah.
have the ziggurats in Mesoamerican culture, and then you have the pyramids in Egypt. Very similar shape. Very
Right.
similar function. Even, I mean, if you're going to go really into it, like how they align with the directions, the poles, right?
Yeah.
And seem to form a line. That it's like
Right.
there's something really incredible about that. Something kind of eerie about that.
Yeah.
But how is it so accurate? You know, but um, but in terms of it, it's interesting in terms of different symbols and different cultures. I want to talk about how they could be unique in some ways
Okay.
too. Now, so I have another podcast that I do. It's a long-running podcast now. We're on our coming up on our 63rd episode of Mythic
Whoa.
Monday, which is a collaboration between myself and the amazing, brilliant myth slayer Scott Mason, also of the Octopus Movement.
Yeah.
And every week we feature a unique mythic figure on the show. We talk about them, we dive into their stories. Scott does the
Yeah.
heft of the storytelling, and I create a live sketch. And then at the end, we come together and we talk about what's coming through the art, what's coming through the story. And anyway, so one of them was Quetzalcoatl, who is the
Mm.
serpent bird snake god of the Aztecs, right? And so part of the story has to do with corn and him presiding over Maes, not just my last name, which is eerily also connected with my last name.
Imagine that.
Maes, right? But so if you look at a lot of goddesses too, they have to do with fertility. They have to do with
Yeah.
with agriculture and providing out of the ground, right? So it's very interesting to me to see, like a male god like Quetzalcoatl presiding over, something of agriculture, right?
Yeah.
Like people coming up out of the ground through corn, right?
Yeah.
That's a really interesting thing, right? So we
Yeah.
have these distinctions in talking about symbols. A lot of them can be expressed through images too. Going back to Egyptians, the hieroglyphs.
Yep.
You have they're more representational, right? So you would have something that's clearly a bird, or something that's clearly, a person with, like Anubis with the head of the jackal, right? So they have these different distinctions to them. So, but what's interesting with runes? I mean, they're very. I want to say, not trip over how most people think of the word primitive, but are
Mm. Right.
very
Good word.
primal might be a very good word,
Yeah.
right? Where they're simply the lines, they're simply the lines to represent them, right? So you could have another culture where something is much more akin to looking like an object, right? So like in
Yeah.
hieroglyphics, you have many different uh, representations of objects, and yeah, so it's interesting actually how I'm always struck by like the relationship between similarities, universal similarities, and then also what's unique in that they exist in the same universe. I think that's something that's really profound to me. That you have things that are universally true and universally applicable, and then you have
Yep.
variation at the at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. It kind of makes me think of this question. You know, when you look at like the Renaissance or you look back, whenever society or modernity gets into trouble, they tend to look back towards the place where things were going okay. Hey,
Mm,
where did we go wrong? We took the long way. We took the wrong way here. And then they look back to a time where things seem to be better. Then they try to build on that. And in some ways, I'm curious, is like, do you think that maybe that's what we're seeing here? Because I know that you and Scott and so many other people have sort of been pointing towards this archaic revival. Like you're going back to ruins, you're going back to Mesoamerica. Do you think that maybe your art, in conjunction with a lot of other artists around the world that seem to be bringing forth this motif, is pointing us to saying, hey, we've kind of lost our way. Maybe we should look back to a time when things were a little bit different so we can find some answers. Is that maybe that the art is speaking through you to society? You ever think about it from that angle?
I think there's a lot of that. I definitely now when we're getting into different ages and different
Right.
generations and different thought patterns, and there's always been this sort of growing pains or conflict
Sure.
between different generations, right? I mean, you have the
Yep.
you have the elders and you have the
Yep.
newest generation, and then you have what is thought of as tried and true and what's traditional and that sort of thing, and then you have the innovation. You have like, hey, let's try these new ideas, and
Yeah.
that's I mean, that in and of itself is a pattern that just repeats itself in so many different ways. And
Right.
you know not to go too far deep into a rabbit hole here, but my wife does some really tremendous work with family businesses in
Mm.
her work. So she runs a program at DU here in Colorado, Denver, where you have resources, workshops, all this different kind of support. It's really just flourishing around family businesses. Now, the
Yeah.
reason why I bring up family businesses is because you can have, say, the founder, the person, let's talk about like multi-generational
Okay.
businesses. Let's talk about ones that have been around for like, you know, 100 years or so,
Yeah.
or something like that, multiple generations. So you have the person who founded it, the person who is the starter, right? The person who had the idea for the business, built it up, say built it, built a team around them, that sort of thing. They
Right.
got it started, right? And then they have their kids, and say those kids participate in the, and I say kids like, you could say their
Yeah.
children, you could say like, 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, you know, and then how do they grow that? How do they take, and you have to consider what worked then may not necessarily work now or in the future, right? So being able to bring new ideas into the process and say, like, yo, pops, mom, what you did, that really got us here. That really, say they're very respectful and say, like, what you did got us to this place. Now, now we're at a different phase, and the world is a different place, and there are new things that we got to consider, maybe new technologies that we have to consider to grow, to adapt, and to keep on going, right? And that's a really valid thing. They both have their merits, right? I mean, you can have the foundation. You have to have a foundation, but then
Yeah.
you also have to be able to grow out of that, right? And so we're at a very interesting point in time where we can look back at all of this history, all of these different ages, all the different things that have transpired, and we can we can sort of critique them, right?
Yeah.
And there's this mindset like, oh, the things we did back then, like, yeah, we did them because we didn't know any better. We were trying to do our best, whatever. And then, but we got it figured out now. And pretty much it's funny how
Totally.
every generation seems to think that,
Yeah.
right? That's, um, but being able to look at things like myth, things that are I say archaic as in
Yeah.
I think that's synonymous with foundational, right?
Yeah.
Things that are timeless, things that don't erode with age. That we can look back at those things and say, it's not that we actually do know better than the realization of these patterns. This is something that seems to persist. This is something that seems to still be relevant in many different ways, right? And it's funny whenever a lot of times when I talk to people about myth, it's like this thing that they studied in college or high school, and it's like, oh yeah, myth. Oh yeah, I studied mythology. I
Mm.
remember that. It's like it still applies, man. Like
Yeah.
it still very much applies, right? But it's just it's funny, and if you were to drive down the street or go into any given store, like how often do you hear mentions of myth? How often do you hear mentions of mythology as relevant to our lives, right? So it's something that really strikes me as interesting and profound and deeply needed too. So being able
Yeah.
to bring people back into a realization of these stories that are around us and within us, and they all still apply. And I'm a huge proponent of the belief, this conviction that being conscious of them allows us to live more conscious lives too, not just to fall in these automatic patterns that we can get stuck into, but now to move through our lives really as mythical, heroic experiences. So I'm gonna do a quick plug here.
Yeah, please. Let
Uh,
me hear.
yeah. So my wife and I have created this program we call immersive art meditation,
Okay.
which, by the way, oh, wait. Okay. I did mention it last time. I did mention it first time, but for people who are just hearing it for the first time,
Yeah.
by the way, we're starting this program again. We're starting these sessions again. They
Nice.
are, I'd like to describe them as focused art experiences through the lens of guided meditation. So
Nice.
yeah, so we'll focus on some of my pieces that specifically the Edge of Myth series, which is a 7-part spiritual and psychological journey featuring different deities from different parts of the world, representing different phases of the hero's journey.
Nice.
So every session will go into the storytelling, will go into what is being represented through the art and how that relates to our actual lives too. And each of those pieces, in terms of the journey, I can tie back to a certain point in my life where I've experienced that for myself. So I can say that there are personal stories that have gone into the inspiration
Yeah.
of each one of these pieces. But the whole idea is this mission that I have of people being able to realize in their real lives through mythical art the connection between the myths and their real lives. So that's one of my favorite parts of each of these workshops is being able to see people make these connections between these realizations between the different parts of the journey and something that's happening within their own lives, perhaps something that is happening in someone else's life that they know, and they say like, wow, like I know someone who's going through this.
Yeah.
And we created a thing called the Journeyer's Journal,
Okay.
which allows participants to reflect on each one of these questions, each one of the different themes coming through the session. And I like to think of it as like a living journal because you're going to be
Yeah.
going through your life, and each of these patterns are going to be repeating throughout our lives. So you can look back and say, instead of it being arbitrary and random, you can say, what did I write down last time about this going through immersive art meditation that I can then incorporate into this experience I'm having right now. So being able to have a conscious experience of that phase of the journey in your actual life.
What happens in that immersive art meditation? Is someone drawing? Is someone singing? Like walk us through what it is. Like give us an
Yeah,
example.
yeah, absolutely. So we'll feature one of the pieces of artwork from that series, and it'll be one of the seven. And I'll go into the details of the storytelling, talking about that figure's journey, what they represent, and also my own story as relates to that piece, right? And we've had in our first one, we had kind of an intimate group of people. We had around 8 people per
Yeah.
session, and so just a good size of people to be able to relay questions. It can be very conversational too. So while I'm talking, I definitely invite people to ask questions or pose comments, and just we love the engagement.
Yeah.
And so once I've gone through the piece, then Helena has a visualization. She'll lead us through a meditation together, and we'll each go through a journey that she has crafted that really speaks to the heart of each one of those pieces, that really speaks to whatever the theme is that's coming through that piece, so we can, again, getting a felt presence
Yeah.
experience of what it's about, not just conceptual, not just theoretical, but embodied. And I have to tell you, she does a wonderful job. There have been some times where I come out and it's just so cathartic. I'm literally in tears by the end of it. It's just, wow, it is super powerful. And and we'll want to give people a chance to work on their journals and
Yeah.
reflect as well. So what we've done in the past is we would, like break people into pods or pairs, and so they would be able to reflect off of each other and work on that's part of their journals, and then come back and talk about what's coming through for them. So yeah, it's very interactive, and one of the questions that we get to in terms of immersive art meditation, like, do people create art while they're in the session? It's usually
Mm,
focused around a pre-existing piece, but we have had a session like this, the session with Freya, right, where people drew their version of a goddess. So it would
yeah.
break out the pencil and paper, the colored pencils, and people would be able to draw their version of the goddess. So being able to tap into their own sense of love, self-love, and flourish is so much of what she represents.
Yeah. That sounds therapeutic in so many ways. Sometimes, we already spoke about language and the limits to language, but what happens when you're immersed in a story? You're being inspired by imagery, and then you yourself are actually creating that imagery. I think it shows a more true picture of where you're at and the interpretation of that goddess or that journey. Or I think on some level too, it speaks to the idea of we think of mythology as this story, but not many people think of mythology as an ever-changing story. An example I think of is, the myth of Sisyphus, where people see that as this guy rolling a boulder. But the older I get, the more I realize how heroic that is. Like, that guy's going to do that every day and accept that. Like that is heroic on some level, to realize the amount of, you know, what you're doing. Like, you're just going to do that every day and be okay with that. Like, on some level, you could see that as like, dude, what the fuck is this person doing? They're just going to do that every, what a bunch of dummies. But then if you think, maybe that person has thought about that. Maybe that person understands that what they're doing is for a higher good. Maybe that person understands that they're doing this thing in life, and they've already thought about that, and they still do it. Like, that's like the definition of heroism on some level. So I see these myths as changing. As I get older, I'm like, I was the dummy. I never even saw that aspect. I never saw that perspective. So myths can teach us
Yeah,
this new perspective, and it changes as we change on some level, right?
yeah, Yeah, no, most definitely. And going back to the multifacetedness of a
Yeah.
thing, right? Like
Yes.
whenever I hear somebody say like, "Oh, it's this and not that," right? I
Yes.
always there's just always this kind of antenna that goes off my brain, like, "Are you sure?" You know, like, and there can be just some things that are just so kind of off the mark
Yes.
that it really is just kind of a lens that that person puts on that's not really true
Yep.
what that is, you know. But yeah, the more I look at things, the more I I've always been like a really curious person. The more
Yeah.
I turn things around in my hand
Yes.
and see the different sides of it, how there can be even there can even be meanings on this side that seem to be contradictory to the ones on this side,
Yeah. Yeah.
paradox, right?
Yep.
I mean, God, you got to respect paradox. It's just written in all around us,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So tremendous respect for for the what seem to be contradictory meanings, which are actually complementary, which actually exist on the same thing, right? But like my journey with fatherhood. Well, speaking to the ever pushing aspect, right?
Yeah.
Being a stepfather, I do a lot of the same thing throughout the day, right? Day in and day out. Like we have the same kind of morning routine. We have
Right.
a lot of structure that's built in, right? A lot of things that we just kind of do this, that we kind of do a lot of the same thing every day, right? We definitely have variation. We definitely have enlivenment and fun. We definitely live fun lives, right? Um, and being a stepfather, what that means, what I hold in that means, I consciously step into this family. I consciously, like, I was a bachelor for many, many years,
Yeah.
like very insistent for most of my life, right? And even, there's this refrain from, you hear this from family, like, when are you going to get married, or when are you going to do this and that? And I was just like, no, no, it's not what I
Mm.
wanted to do. There was no part of me that wanted to do that for a long time, right? And I had to come to that realization. I had to come to that place in myself, and it was actually during lockdown. It was during when we were all
Yeah.
inside, and horrible as that was, for some people, I think for a lot of introverts, that was like, oh goody, I get to do whatever I want by myself for a long
Yeah.
period of time, you know. But I definitely had that sense of, how do I want to really spend the rest of my days? How do I
Yep.
actually want to spend the rest of my life? It caused me to think about that and feel
Yeah.
that deeply, right? And so I finally got to that place where I'm like, yeah, I want to be a father. I want to be married. I want to find that person, right? And it seemed to just almost instantly appear in my life once I accepted that. Once I incorporated that. Once I finally got to that place, and it really hit me. I really had the felt experience
Yeah.
of that realization, you know. And so to me, it's a tremendous honor, and to know that I chose Xavier as my son. Even
Yeah.
before I knew him, I'm like, wow, that is one amazing child. Like, he sounds like an amazing human being. I would love to know him, and I would love to be an important part of his life, you know. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it's the journey, it's the journey, and you really never know what is around that next corner too. And you could be going through something. You could be going through a challenge in your life, and it seems you know it seems like you can get kind of lost in it or whatever. But but to know that that can correlate with part of the story, to know that that challenge can actually be one of those phases, and that there is a way that you can consciously move through it, and you can think like, whoa, you know what, this seems daunting, but it's actually all okay. It seems like what can seem insurmountable can be passing. and then that brings a relief to your life. Suddenly it's
Yeah.
not just this arbitrary, random, overwhelming thing that's just burdening down upon you. you know that there's something that you can there's a way that you can approach it. There's a way you can think about it. There's a way that you can move through it, and you can be okay. You can be better than okay. You can be better than you came out, better than you came into it, actually, so much of the time, you know?
I do. It brings up like I it's fascinating to me to think about the conversation thus far as we spoke about symbols and runes and imagery. And
Mm.
even though these things are static on paper or are, we can look at an image of it, of a symbol, it gives us the courage to become that symbol embodied. Like we can embody that symbol, then we becoming the living symbol for someone else to see in action. Like
Yep.
I get goosebumps thinking about like how powerful that transference is, right? Like if you study a symbol long
It's,
enough, then you can become that symbol to someone else in real life. Like,
yeah.
boom. That's magic, man. That's power right there.
Yeah, very well said. Very, very, very well said. To embody that symbol. Whew,
And
man.
that sounds to me like what you were describing in the beginning, where like, listen, George, when I create this artwork and someone can see it, like that is transference. Like you've got the message of that symbol and you have successfully transferred that meaning for someone else to find. You've become a medium for that symbol. Like that's, I don't know, man. I hesitate to find a better word than beautiful for that. Like I don't know if there is a better word for that.
It is. It is. It is. It's astoundingly beautiful and honoring, and
Yeah,
going back to
honoring. That's a
the
great one.
challenges that can actually lead to strengths on the other side too. I spent okay, so I'm on the spectrum. I was diagnosed with Asperger's when I was like in high school, and I've spent a lot of time not being understood by people, and there was a long period of
Yep.
time like kind of struggling to articulate myself and to be understood. I felt like I had to try really hard to form my words in ways that could connect with people,
Yep.
and for them to understand. Especially, oh my God, especially growing up, especially even like before I was diagnosed or whatever, that type of thing. Just growing up, and things that may make sense to me but may seem off to other person, that sort of thing, right? So so that desire, that deep yearning to be understood,
Yeah.
feeling that like there's this vastness, that say like the vastness of storytelling, this vastness within myself that needs to come out, and so it comes out through the artwork. And so, I mean, I'm being pretty vulnerable here in saying this, but
Yeah.
um, I think a lot of that is that urgency that comes through the artwork. Like, let me show you this. Let me show you what I feel inside myself. Let me show you this immense beauty, this immense vast world that comes through me through the artwork. And so, there's a part of that that's self-expressive for sure, but it's like what I'm focused on and what drives me is something of substance that goes even deeper than me, and even beyond this person, Matt Maes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's what I am enchanted by that comes through me, right? And talking about becoming the symbol, becoming the
Yeah.
thing, and the more that enchantment takes hold, the more that I become an embodiment of that. And that's what you feel through artists, right? Is
Yeah.
what's coming through that artist, that they feel coming through them, right? They then get to become an embodiment of that thing, and you can just feel it off of that creator. Whether you're a visual artist or musician or philosopher, whatever it is that comes through you, that people can just
Mm.
feel that off of you, you know. So that's so much of where that comes from, and you know, every piece of artwork that I create, I throw, I throw in all the tricks in the bag,
Yeah.
right? I throw in everything that I'm curious about, everything that's well relevant and can be composed into a single image. You know, that's something I deeply love to do, is take all of the things that are connected and relevant with the ideas that come through within that artwork and compile them into one thing, you know, compose them into one image. I really feel like more of a composer in a lot of ways. You know,
Yeah.
in fact, composition is my favorite part of the creative process, right? Like how you can weave the eye through the artwork, where the rests are,
Mm.
where the points of focus are. I love that, you know. And then from there, I can just slope down all the details and stuff. I mean, I've been obsessed with detail my whole, you know, my whole artistic journey. I've always really loved going into the deep details of things, right? So that part is
Yeah.
just an absolute joy for me. But the composition, that's where it all has to come together, is how you know, how you put it together, how you how you choose to compose that piece, you know, the intention behind it. And you know, I found so often that I can I can put something there that may look cool at first, and then I'll realize like, oh shit, like that actually adds to the story. Like that actually, you know, that actually
Yeah.
has a place has a place there. Or by the opposite token, that there will be a negative space. I say negative space in
Right.
terms of, you know, the artistic term, like the, you know, the empty space
Right.
within something, the empty space around something, right? Where it'll be seem like just the right fit for exactly that puzzle piece to go there. And then I'll put it in later, and I'll realize like, wow, that was just made for that thing to go there.
Do you ever think, like, I know that feeling of like you created the piece, but you simultaneously created the most perfect piece without even knowing you made it. And you look back and you're like, holy shit, did I do that on purpose? How did I know how to do that?
I love it.
Like,
I love
right?
it.
That's so amazing.
It's oh my god, it's such a joy. It's such a charge. And another
Yeah.
thing that I love is when someone will point something out within the artwork that perhaps I didn't even see there, that adds to
Yes.
the story, right? That
Yeah.
they'll see something in there, and you know, like, wow, well, I mean, that's just perfect, you know, when like
Yeah.
not even I saw it. And then I can see someone point something out that just you know, brings the whole piece together. And so one example of this would be in the beginning of the Edge of Myth series. It's funny, I even use the words "in the beginning." The piece is about Eve, by the way. The
Imagine
piece is
that.
about Eve from Book of Genesis, right? Is while I was creating this piece, and she has a duality about her. She
Mhm.
has the, you know, the motherhood, the fertility, really the origins, and then you have the chaos. You have the
Yeah.
garden on fire. You have the smoke rising from the trees, but then you have the dove with the olive branch in its mouth, the redemption, right? And then you have this jellyfish symbol. You have this jellyfish on her neck, right? And at first, I put this there, and I'm like, well, you know, I thought a jellyfish looks very feminine. It's very, you know, very, you know, very cool. I think of it as very, you know, playful and, you know, feminine, basically. So and you know, aesthetically, it looked very cool there and flowing, and you know, with its tentacles, kind of, you know, kind of floating upwards. And so as I'm drawing in this jellyfish, my friend who at the time who was like watching me work on this comes up and he says, "Did you know a jellyfish is a symbol for eternal things?" I'm like, "Whoa!"
Hmm.
Like, no, I did not know that.
Yeah,
But
me
when you
neither.
consider the whole cycle and the whole the whole story, the legacy of humanity enduring throughout time, going through chaos, going through
Yeah.
these trials, and you have this beauty of humanity that transcends all that, is able to pass through all that, you know. So to me, yeah, things like that, I'm like, wow, I mean, that's just uncanny and mystical and amazing in so many different ways.
Yeah. It's I think it speaks to the idea that creation is there's like we lack the words to describe it, but there is something that is creating through us, communicating to us. And when you can look back on that, whether it's through you seeing something in there that you didn't realize you created, or better yet, someone telling you a story that inspired them that you had no way of possibly knowing, or a symbol that you put on there, like it gets us so close. It allows us to touch the fire, if you will. You know what I mean? To touch that fire that is unexplainable and be like, oh my God, I am part of something so much bigger than this. And I'm so blessed to be able on some way to help other people see it. I think so much in life we talk about our deficits and we worry and we have this anxiety that we're not enough. But the truth is, everybody can operate from a place of creativity. And when you do that, man, you are becoming that fire of inspiration to other people. And I think
Mm.
that you, Matt, are a fire of inspiration for people, man. I think the artwork is awesome. I think that the idea of an immersive therapy, man, is like it's cutting edge, and I love it, man. I'm super stoked to get to hear about it and think about it, man. What do you got coming up on the horizon, man? Is there going to be more? Do you have any? Let me say it this way. What do you have coming up on the horizon that you're excited about?
Oh, thank you. First of all, thank you, dude. I'm just so honored, and it's just amazing to be talking to you, and amazing to be back here again.
Vice versa.
And yeah, um, so the biggest thing that I've got going on, that we're building up immersive art meditation. We're going to be
Okay.
starting those sessions upcoming early next year. We're trying to avoid the thing with the holidays and really give ourselves a good runway to build it up into, to have a good robust group going in. So we're really, really excited about that. And it's, it really is
Yeah.
kind of our brainchild. It really is kind of our biggest co-creation that we're passionate about.
Love it.
Myself and my wife, Helena. And in terms of my own art right now, I'm working my way through the Goddess series I call Visions Beyond the Glass. And it's an 11-part series featuring goddesses from different parts of the world. You have some who are more well known and some who are, I think, more due should be given to, ones who are
Yeah.
kind of more should be more well known. Like Sedna would be one of them. Inuit aquatic mother goddess. She is kind of in the middle of the series. But yeah, I really wanted to do justice to representing different goddesses from different cultures, and
Yeah.
seeing them in their using their magics, or using their abilities. So being active through the artwork, and not just like posing, not just like in a cool pose or something like that, but to really show them in their aliveness, right? Something I
Yeah.
put a huge emphasis on. And going back to the Norse, I'm creating an Odin piece that I'm
Nice.
extremely excited about. And I tell you, um, I really had to I really had to wait until I really felt the charge to go
Yeah.
into that one, because he just represents so many different sides. There are just so many different parts of his story. He just has so many different tales, so many different facets to him that yeah, just one day I had this canvas and I just went in for this 7-hour session with the pencils and just did all the outlines and did his spear Gungnir. a spear that never misses, that always hits its target. And you have Gary and Freki as two wolves, and Hugin and Noonan as two ravens. All these different parts of them, but I've never seen, or how to say this, all the Odin artwork that I've seen seems to have a lot of the same type of elements, which is cool. Like his wolves and his ravens, very very popular. His spear, of course, but nothing that really captures like so many of his different sides, so many of his different stories, right?
Yeah.
So I think of this as like a really passionate Odin fans Odin. And then lastly, I have I call this my visual art and storytelling masterpiece, is my graphic novel series, the Eye Hacker Saga, which I've finally gotten to the point where I'm putting in the panels. Like,
Nice.
so yeah, so I started this thing about 5 years ago, and it, I've always wanted to create a graphic novel, ever since I picked up my first one at 18 years old. And what I found is, like, you have to align the writer's vision and the artist's vision if you've got two people creating it. And what I've found is it's weirdly simpler, but more straightforward if you have a story within yourself and you're an artist and you can write and illustrate it yourself, like much like my first graphic novel, The Crow. James O'Barr wrote and illustrated that whole thing all by himself, and as we know, it's a cult classic. Absolutely. So, yeah, I just got completely enthralled in writing this story, and creating this story, and for a number of months, several months, it was like all I could think about. So I was just pulling down the pieces,
Yep.
the puzzle pieces, and arranging them into this whole story. And then after that, I put it down and came back to it a while later, did all the storyboards, all the all those type of things to really get the visuals in there, a bunch of concept art. And then I'm like, wow, that was a wild thing about work. And then yeah, and even it's even got different languages. They're like, I'm creating different languages for different cultures within the story. So it's a whole thing. I mean, it's going to take many many years to complete all of it, but yeah, the more that I work on it, the more, I can say this with any artwork, the higher degree of clarity, the faster I can go, because
Mm,
the more that you can,
yeah.
and I would pass this on to any creators, the more you can eliminate that resistance, that like, what am I going to draw? What am I going to write? Like, sit down, break it down, figure out, like, sit with it, right? Really try and articulate it. And then once, like, the more that clarity that you can have, then the faster you can go. I mean, I would say that
Yeah.
clarity is synonymous with speed, right?
Mm,
So now that I know what I'm doing in the story, I mean, I had to write it first before I would even know what to draw, of course,
yeah.
right? So one has to come before the other. But now being in this place, it's like I can really slope through those panels, having all that clarity of how I want it to look.
Yeah. That's a great tool for people. And I think it resonates with a lot of people who find themselves up against, whether it be writer's block or any sort of creative endeavor, you find yourself questioning sometimes. It's almost like the signal doesn't come through the noise sometimes, and you just sit there and you wait and you're trying to tune it in. And then, but yeah, the idea of gaining clarity to promote speed it's a great point. And sometimes I think it's necessary to have those moments of, there's a reason Tolkien's work took so long. He too was creating different languages. You know what I mean? It's not an easy thing to do. And you got to,
Yeah,
once you create a language, then you have to think about, okay, well, how does this language create a perspective. What would this person look like if they spoke that language? Is this a rough language? Is it a singing language? It's it's life's work,
Yeah.
man. And
Yeah.
I see that in the patterns, man. It's
Thank,
wonderful. But
thank you.
yeah,
If I could speak to that real
yeah,
quick.
please, man. What you got?
And by the way, like it's so cool to hear people make the Tolkien connection too. That's another thing. I'm
Right?
really humble and honored by that, and I just think it's so cool that it comes up. And so I found that it's again weirdly simpler to create these multiple languages simultaneously rather than one by one. The reason for that is because yeah,
Okay, let's
I'm
hear it.
crazy. I'm crazy. But the reasoning behind that is, say, starting with the sounds of different words or different languages, right? So say you can listen to someone speaking a certain language. This is how I like to think of it. So you can listen to someone speaking German or speaking
Mm-hmm.
Japanese or French, and while you may or may not understand what's being said, you can understand that that's what that language sounds like. You can
Yeah.
hear what French sounds like. It has a certain flavor, a certain characteristic to it, right?
Right.
So following that same logic, starting with the sounds of the different languages first, with like you kind of alluded to it just now, like which one, like you can have one that sounds rougher, right, or
Yes.
one that sounds more flourishy and smooth and more beautified, right? Starting with that, the different sounds of them, you start with those different sounds, then you can start to arrange the words based on which one they sound like, which one they sound most like. Does
Yeah.
this one have more of a j, or this one have like a k, that sort of thing. Those are very distinct from one another. So
Right.
starting with that, and then you can really articulate what those words are. And I would really suggest being inspired by existing languages too. So for example, for those who watch Game of Thrones, if you know that the Dothraki, the race of horsemen, so their language was actually inspired by Mongolian, right?
Mm.
So I was able to find, so knowing that is very helpful. And then I was able to find a free Dothraki dictionary online. There's a PDF you can find. Yes, you can. You can
Yeah.
find a free Dothraki dictionary online. And then I looked at what are some of those sounds of that language, right? And so without like, well, I can compile those and say like which ones of those kind of do I want to remix into this language, right? And so I have it, so I wrote out like what languages were have been inspired by which different languages, right? And it again, like going for clarity
Yeah.
before I even go for too much detail, for too much articulation, right? Like
Yeah.
starting with this game up here with the understanding and the clarity, and then you know yeah, figuring out how. It's a fun challenge. It's a fun puzzle, like
Yeah.
creating these different languages. And that goes with different cultures too.
Of
So
course.
they're how they dress, how they look, what their mannerisms are, what their customs are, things like that. I mean, really, you're really going into world building,
Yeah.
that
Yep.
all that stuff takes. I mean, I've really long had a tremendous respect for writers for that reason,
Yeah.
is because you have to be like the master of that universe that you're creating, you know. Um, and it's again weirdly simpler if you are creating that whole world because no one's telling you what the right rules are. But there are definitely things that apply. You have to make it believable. That's the challenge, is to take this invented world and make it believable.
Yeah. I agree. It's interesting you bring that up. I'm a huge fan of like Brandon Sanderson and some of these other sci-fi or fantasy, you know, books that the idea of Patrick Rothfuss is another great one, but they create these worlds that you can inhabit on some level, and it's just an inspiration to creation. And but I see that the same thing that attracts me to world building is the same thing that attracts me to the world you're building. Like, I think that you have those same skills and you're sharing them with people, which a lot of people don't do. Like, I think that's super awesome, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for doing it, man. So, well, I would invite everybody within the sound of my voice to, whether you're listening live tomorrow or 10 years from now, to go down to the show notes and check out Matt Maes. Reach out to him. He's got an incredible collection of artwork. He sees the world. I think from this conversation, you get an idea of what it takes to create different worlds, and how he creates, more importantly, is a window into how he creates, which I think is magical. And go down, check him out. If you like this conversation, reach out to him. I know he does consultation, he does artwork. Him and his wife have a really cool practice of this immersive meditation. And yeah, reach out to him. And that's, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we got for today. I hang on afterwards, Matt, briefly afterwards. But to everybody else, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I hope you have a beautiful day. That's all we got. Aloha.
Right on. Thank you, everybody. George, this is a real joy. I've really been looking forward to this. Super awesome. And yeah, just a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Right back at you, man. Well, hang on. I'll talk to you briefly afterwards, and then we'll end it here for these guys. Thank you so much, everybody. Aloha.
Peace out.